Well, the New York Mets season has unfortunately come to an end as they lose to the Dodgers 10-5 in Game 6. They lose the series 4-2, and the Mets magic runs out in LA, and they will be on the sidelines watching the remainder of the MLB season, watching the World Series between the Dodgers and the Yankees. Welcome into another edition of the Bleav in Mets podcast. Chris Schubert, Jack McKessie here with you. I considered for a brief moment sleeping on this and us not doing a show this evening, but I knew I needed to just dump all of these thoughts and opinions about this team and this season coming to an end tonight so that tomorrow I can just start looking ahead towards 2025. Jack, a disappointing end. Kind of could see the writing on the wall very early in this game, and the New York Mets' magical season is no more.
This whole series was a very weird back and forth of one team just punching the other in the mouth and then not letting up until there were 27 outs. And unfortunately, that was the same case for Game 6 today. We really hoped that our ace, Sean Manaea, was going to be able to come through, but it just really seemed like, the toll of all the innings late in the season and in the postseason and taxed bullpen, it wasn't meant to be. And just trying to stay positive on how magical the run was and look forward, but it hurts.
Yeah, and this feels very similarly to me to the way 2015 felt, right? You get to the World Series and you start thinking about the idea of a championship window opening, albeit this group's not going to have the same window that the other group did because this group's going to look a lot different in 2025. But that group in 2015 made a wild card appearance in 2016, and then it was 6 years again before we saw the Mets in the postseason. So nothing in life is guaranteed. The only thing that is guaranteed is what is in front of you. And for the New York Mets, it was 2 wins away from playing in the World Series for the first time since 2015. So that part of it sucks. We'll break it down from all the different angles here in just a second, but got to tell you about BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything sports betting, every stat, matchup breakdown, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during games with the largest catalog of odds on everything from football, MLB playoffs. Jack has the World Series odds. Who is the favorite in the World Series, Jack?
I'm not seeing any for the full series quite yet, but BetOnline does have Game 1. Okay. They've got Garrett Cole lined up with Yoshinobu Yamamoto for Game 1.
About right.
And the game's going to be in LA, which is significant. The Dodgers are 1.5 run favorites with minus 125 for the money line on BetOnline right now. Over/under set at 7.5 runs.
So you got MLB playoff action for the remainder of that. You have the NHL, NBA, and even political props if that is your if that piques your interest. When the game's over, head on over to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker. Unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Jack, the plan was pretty simple. When you go down 3-1, the hardest game to win, and this is going to sound stupid, but I don't really care. The hardest game to win is Game 5. You have to force the issue. And in my mind, walking into Game 5 at home, if they were able to get that done, I felt really good about Game 6 because Sean Manaea, our ace on the mound in Game 6 against the Dodgers bullpen game. We saw how that went in Game 2 for the Mets, and I felt really confident about this team forcing stuff or forcing the series to a Game 7. And so they completed step 1 of the plan. They get to step 2 of the plan. And look, if you came to Jack and I before the game and said, this is the stat line you're going to get from Sean Manaea, okay, then the Mets are never winning. Part of the plan was Sean Manaea being our ace Sean Manaea. And unfortunately, and I do not want this to be negative towards Sean Manaea. I don't want this to impact people's thoughts about whether or not the Mets should bring him back in 2025. Like, none of that should matter. He just hit a wall. Like, he threw 181 innings in the regular season and 24 innings in the postseason were his numbers. After last year with the Giants throwing 117 in the regular season, 158 the year before that. You have to go back to 2021 in Oakland for a year in which he threw over 170 innings. So he was just out of gas. He just ran out of steam. You can say the same thing about Luis Severino, and I'll look up his FanGraphs numbers real quick because I guarantee you're going to have to go back decades to find a year in which Luis Severino threw the amount of innings that he did this year. So 182 innings in the regular season. 2022 and 2023 combined with the New York Yankees, 191 innings. Yeah. We reached a critical mass point. This rotation did so much work and stayed so healthy to put this on the table that they just ran out of steam. And I hate that that's what happened here. But that's what happened. That's why the command went. It's why they walked so many people. All of the trusted members of this team ran out of steam. Phil Maton ran out of steam. Jose Budo, as a reliever, ran out of steam. They just were not. Listen, the New York Mets were never built to do this, but as the season wore on and we started to entertain the idea of this team being able to do this, they just weren't designed this way. If you asked David Stearns right now if he could reconstruct the team in August, he would have added like 2 more starters if he thought this team was going to make it to the NLCS. This truly was never part of the plan. And once they got here, they were running on fumes. They were like having an electric car and the battery's at like 2% and you're trying to make it home. It's just never going to happen.
The thing that really proved the difference was the fact that it wasn't just the starters that were running out of steam, but it was the bullpen, like you mentioned. And we were texting back and forth, kind of joking about which relievers were on the trust tree by the end of the playoffs.
And trust branch at one point.
The trust branch. It really just ended up being Ryan Stanek and Edwin Diaz by the end because, like you said, every single other reliever just ran out of steam. They didn't have it because of how taxed they were throughout, the wild card series and the division series, and then the first few games of the championship series. They just had to go to the bullpen a lot, which was a factor because the starting rotation also ran out of steam. And so they weren't able to go deeper into games like they were down the stretch in August and September. They weren't able to save the bullpen like they were in some of the games earlier in this playoff run. And that just meant the bullpen ran out of steam. And ultimately, when you look at this series, when we're looking at the series in hindsight, the difference was the pitching because the Dodgers had a bullpen game in game 6 that they, needed to clinch the World Series. Otherwise, it was going to be a whatever can happen in game 7 can happen. And their bullpen just came through. And for the Mets, when Sean and I ran out of steam 2+ innings into game 6, the bullpen had already run out of steam and just was not able to hold on to any kind of lead or keep the Mets in a position where they could contend in the game. And so at the end of the day, that running out of steam really just is the difference because the Dodgers, despite all of the injuries to their starting pitching, despite all of the issues with their pitching down the stretch, and the advantage seemed to be with the Mets starting rotation, ultimately the Mets ran out of steam and the Dodgers didn't.
I don't want this to be all negative, and we are going to get to a lot of the positive that came from this run up to this point in this year as a whole, but you basically didn't have a left fielder in this series because Brandon Nimmo was playing hurt. Yeah. You didn't really have a bottom part of your lineup that produced anything. Jose Iglesias, that magic kind of wore out to the point where you put Jeff McNeil in there, and even he didn't really give you a whole lot. Francisco Alvarez, the first 3 games of this series struggled, although games 4, 5, and 6 looked a lot better at the plate. But you didn't get anything really from Tyrone Taylor. He was in there for mainly his glove. And so you just they were smoke and mirrors a lot of the time to be able to score runs. If Lindor and Vientos and Pete and Winker weren't doing anything, that was it. They were not going to be able to produce enough runs to beat this Dodgers team. And you didn't have a lot of great bench options. JD Martinez was completely washed by the end of this run. Harrison Bader was not a trusted bat that you could put into the lineup and give 3 at-bats in a postseason game. Luis Angel Acuna is a young player who is too swing and miss happy. Like, they just didn't have the parts late in this series and late in this season to be able to weather what was a storm of their pitching going away and their bats just not all clicking at the same time.
That was the big issue that I really came away with from, let me think, the game 3, game 4, and game 6 was just, it felt like the magic was just gone all of a sudden because, I mean, you think back to this entire postseason run and the Pete home run in game 3 of the wild card, the Lindor grand slam in game 4 of the NLDS. There weren't any of those big hits when the Mets needed them in these games where they were trailing. Like, there were multiple times throughout games 3, 4, and 6 where they got the bases loaded or they got runners in scoring position with no outs, and then nothing happened. That, like, the real difference making moments to me for the Dodgers were guys like Shohei Ohtani being unable to make it out when there were runners in scoring position. It was just unbelievable. And that was the kind of thing that the Mets were able to take advantage of so much, not just in the postseason, but down the stretch in the regular season. And it just, the magic ran out. There wasn't anything from the bottom half of the lineup. Even guys like Lindor were striking out swinging with guys on and in important moments. This is a team that, I mean, I said it about the pitching, but it just felt like everyone was so out of gas because there were so many high intensity moments for so long that eventually it just caught up to them and they weren't able to come through with some of those big moments again in the NLCS.
They have been playing playoff baseball since they were 11 games below 500. Like
Yeah.
they have been playing a playoff brand and a playoff style of baseball for that long just to entertain the possibility of being 2 wins away from the World Series.
I mean, how many times did we have to say this is the biggest game of the season?
Right.
Like
We said it
for months.
we said it 5 times in a 2-week span. Like in
Yeah.
14 days, we said it at least 5 times. And so you just no team. I don't care who you are. You can't constantly always come through in those moments. Like
Right.
at some point you're going to hit the wall, and this team just overall they ran out of gas. And I hate that that's the reason for what happened. Now, don't get me wrong. The Dodgers are a much better team. I think even if the Mets had half a tank, it was going to be difficult. But they just ran out of gas. The tank was on empty, and there wasn't a reinforcement. There wasn't something Carlos Mendoza could do. They put Kodai Senga on this roster. It just didn't work out. Right? That just was not a good idea. It didn't play out the way that they wanted it to, and it just ultimately was more of a negative than it was a positive for them. They just didn't have the horses to get them through this series against this good of a team. It is the New York Mets have a good team. The New York Mets of 2024 had a good team. They did not have a lineup that had 3 MVPs batting 1 through 3. They did not have a lineup that mirrored what the Dodgers were able to do in the series. And so they needed all the magic. They needed everything to go their way, and they just weren't able to do that. Now, that's the negative. And the Mets season is over. It's disappointing. We don't know when they're going to be back here. There are a lot of question marks. Great. We have an eternity in the offseason. This podcast is still going to come to you 2 to 3 times a week, and we have a ton of offseason stuff that I can finally talk about on the show with everybody that we plan on doing. There are a lot of positives, in my opinion, that have come from this run. And Jack, I want to run two main positives by you and see what you think. Positive number 1, the New York Mets have one of the best third basemen in all of the National League on their roster for 2025. That's positive number 1. A star was born during this run and during this postseason. Mark Vientos is a top 3 third baseman in the National League right now. I'm very quickly doing rough math in my head. I think he's a top 3 third baseman. So that's positive number 1.
I would have to agree with you there. I think if we had any doubts about Mark Vientos being able to perform to the level that he did when the lights got brighter and the moments got bigger, he put every single one of those questions to rest, because his performance throughout the entire postseason and including in this NLCS, which I think if the Mets were able to do some kind of magic and come through and win, I think he had a really good shot at winning NLCS MVP just because of how much he was able to come up big in moments. Even tonight, like one of the lone shining stars with that home run. Obviously the Mets were trailing and they needed kind of a spark, and Vientos, put a charge into a baseball and it made me feel a little bit better. But it's really nice to know that the left side of the Mets infield for the next 5+ years seems to be one of the best situations that in at least the National League for the future.
He has 30 home run, 100 RBI potential.
Yes.
That's what the Mets have in the middle of their lineup for a very long time. And I'm looking at the third baseman in the National League last year. I mean, you could convince me to take Manny Machado over Mark Vientos. You could convince me that when he is at his best, you could tell me that Austin Riley is better than Mark Vientos. But again, at his best, Vientos had a better year than Riley. Then after that, we're talking Alec Boehm. You ain't convincing me to take Alec Boehm over Mark Vientos. Matt Chapman, an older player, like he is a top 3 third baseman in the National League entering 2025. That's a great thing for the New York Mets to have. And to your point, that left side of the infield, you don't even need to worry about it for a long time. Positive number 2 is not that we needed proof of this, but David Stearns walked into what is going to be probably the worst year he oversees from a resource perspective as president of baseball ops for the New York Mets. And he churned out a team that won 89 games and was 2 wins away from going to the World Series. In the worst year he's going to have resource-wise. Their payroll this year was $346 million, 363. I forget the numbers. They all blur together. I'll try to get it here on the fly. But their number for next year, $336 million is their estimated final payroll for 2024. Their current commitments for 2025, $174 million. He's going to have the most resources. He is this year was the most that David Stearns will have his hands tied behind his back when it comes to improving the New York Mets. So to me, I am over the moon about what this offseason could look like for this team.
I am also going to fully agree with you here. You look at what the expectation was going into this season, and it was like, maybe make the playoffs, right? Like, we hope that we can maybe make the play. And then that even shifted as the season continued, and they ended up, 0-5, 22-33, whatever it was. And it was like, well, maybe we see some good things from some of the younger guys that get some good opportunities. But no, like you said, this was a team that was 2 wins away from going to the World Series. And, the Justin Verlander contract is coming off the books for next year. The Max Scherzer contract's coming off the books. I think Severino's going to be a free agent.
Hey, the James McCann contract.
Wow.
Books, please.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, the expectations coming in were so essentially right above mediocre. Like, we hoped that this team was going to finish above 500 and have an outside shot at being a wild card team. And this team proved that they were one of the best teams in the National League with, like you said, a lack of resources, a bullpen constructed on the fly, a starting rotation that had to get patched up along the way because of injuries. It's going to be so interesting to see how this offseason plays out. Like, this is probably the most fascinating offseason that the Mets have ahead of them that I can remember, just because of how good the front office looked at being able to pick the right guys, make the right decisions. We talked in our first episode doing this podcast, Chris, about how it felt like David Stearns was pressing all of the right buttons. And I mean, that proved itself in spades in this postseason run, because guys like Sean Manaea, who were a reclamation project, Luis Severino, a bullpen, like I said, that was constructed on the fly because of injuries, coming through in these big moments, and like trade deadline acquisitions like Ryan Stanek and Jesse Winker. So this is a team, going into this offseason, they have the Steve Cohen money. David Stearns has the Steve Cohen money to make a roster that can continue to contend. And I really have a lot of faith in the general manager, in David Stearns, and Steve Cohen's willingness to spend, in Carlos Mendoza as the manager, and then the core right now of Lindor and Nimmo, at least in the lineup, Alvarez. I have faith that this team can contend with more resources poured into the roster going into 2025 and beyond.
And that's what makes me kind of take a step back from comparing it so strongly to 2015. I feel the same in my gut that you just never know if they're going to be able to return, because, again, the playoffs, it is a roll of the dice, just as the Philadelphia Phillies, right? Like, they were built to win in October, and they have yet to do it with this core. So anything is possible, right? It took the Yankees a really long time under Aaron Boone to get to this point where they're playing in a World Series, right? Dave Roberts, this is the first time. Like, he has the COVID championship in 2020. This will be their first time to win a title under Dave Roberts in a 162 game season. So it's nothing's guaranteed. But what makes me feel different about 2015 is I know that there's going to be reinvestment into the team. Like, Steve Cohen is not going to look at what happened and say, you know what, David, you don't get the resources. You don't get the money. You don't get the ability to make signings. Like, Juan Soto is a free agent. Corbin Burns is a free agent. There are a lot of great players out there for this team to be able to acquire. And I'm not going to try to do the free agency shows ahead of the free agency shows that we're going to do. But I think the larger point that makes me, it allows me to take a step back, Jack, and sit here and talk with you and be more positive about the run, is because I don't think I'm going to feel like this is a missed opportunity. I feel like the Mets are going to be back in the postseason. And in today's baseball, that's what you need. You just need to have a chance. You just need to be able to be in the mix. You need to have your name on that bracket when the season is over. And I don't have a lack of confidence in the front office and the ownership structure to deliver the resources to make sure that happens. Where after 2015, I think we all kind of did have that worry because of who the owner was.
I think the other thing, too, is looking forward as to how the roster will be constructed and what decisions will be made in the offseason. What's David Stearns proved before 2024 was a willingness to be able to spend, not rationally is not the right word, but very logically and like wisely. They're not just going to be dumping money. They're not just going to be throwing money at Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer again. That's a past mistake that I believe that the Mets will have learned from, that Steve Cohen will have learned from. They're not going to spend all this money on aging free agents, which is which was the Wilpons MO for so long. And I think going forward, I have faith that between Cohen and Stearns, they're going to spend their money on players that they believe can help out the Mets, not just for the next couple years, but much further down the road as in free agency, as well as with the development crew that they have in the farm system to, create a sense of prosperity and long-term contention like that we've seen with the Dodgers over the last decade, rather than windows open, let's dump money at guys that are only going to help us out for 2 or 3 years. And who knows after that. I really have a lot of faith in the foresight of the front office going forward.
Here is the other thing that I'm extremely positive about, or at least I want to be a major takeaway from this 2025 season. Francisco Lindor is going to go down as an all-time great New York Met. Like that is guaranteed. Like that is etched in stone in my mind after this run. Like he took the team offensively when they were struggling, when they were 11 games below 500, and he put the team on his back so much that he hurt his back in September. That's how much he carried this team in the second half offensively. He is absolutely going to be, at worst, the second place finisher in the NL MVP. He was a superstar. He was a leader. He was the captain of this team. And I think this year, and this is why I want to make this such a strong point, is, to me, this puts to bed any conversation that we are ever going to have about Francisco Lindor not being able to thrive in New York if he gets off to a slow start in April and May. Like if he has a slow first 6 weeks. Would I rather him not do that and him be able to get off to a great start so he could hit 35 home runs and drive in a ton of runs and win MVPs? Absolutely. I would rather us not have to, watch 6 weeks of him struggle. But I'm no longer going to say this guy's a bum, or not like I ever said this, but I'm not going to entertain people who say this guy's a bum. He doesn't need to be here anymore. Trade him. He's not built for New York. I'm done with any of that. Like that is over after this season. And that's the other major takeaway that I have. Also with the fact that you have a manager who's only going to get better from this, who's only going to learn from some of the stuff that I think he got wrong in this postseason. And more so than I felt about really anybody this team has had as a manager in my lifetime, I feel pretty confident that Carlos Mendoza is only going to get better, and he is a great leader of this team.
I think those are two more takeaways that I obviously can't disagree with. I fully agree, especially with the Lindor sentiment. I texted you this, but if you couldn't tell, video watchers on YouTube, I have a David Wright shrine essentially in my background here, and he's been my favorite Met since I was 5 years old when he first came up. And to watch Francisco Lindor play for my favorite team, the New York Mets, over the past few years, and especially this season, has been so much fun, because for so long throughout September and throughout the postseason run, and even when they were struggling, just knowing that they had a rock solid foundational piece going forward, and a guy that I had so much faith in coming up in big moments down the stretch, the home run in that doubleheader after Edwin Diaz's blown save in Atlanta, the moments that he had, the grand slam in the National League Division Series against the Phillies. These are moments that I'm going to remember forever in my Mets fandom. And Lindor is just rapidly rising up the ranks as my favorite, in my favorite Mets to play since I've been alive. And it's so much fun to watch him play on both sides of the ball. And I'm very happy to know that he's going to be on my team for, 6-7 more years.
It was just a special season. And yes, it was special because of Grimace. Yes, it was special because of OMG. It was special because all of that, stuff that happened over the course of the year, right? All of those moments are things that obviously we took on as Mets fans and took on as a Mets community, and we just went with them. We went where the winds took us. But what made this season so special to me is, more so than I can think about any other year, and maybe because it's still fresh and time will determine this, but I can just remember all of the ups and all of the downs. I can remember 0-5 and about to be no hit by the Detroit Tigers and
feels
coming
like
back,
rock bottom.
Right, like to come back and win that game to get to 1-5. I can remember being 22-33 and thinking Did they get this all wrong? Like, what is the trade deadline going to look like? I can remember those blown saves in Miami by Edwin Diaz. I can remember the Corbin Carroll home run against Edwin Diaz in Arizona, where I thought that was where it was over. But you know what I can also remember? I can remember every time Sean Manaea took the mound in a big spot for this team. I can remember Francisco Lindor hitting a home run in the top of the ninth against Bowden Francis and the Toronto Blue Jays, which I think kind of started all of this. I can remember on a Sunday with everything on the line, David Peterson delivering an absolute gem to keep the season alive. I can remember Francisco Lindor doing what he did in Atlanta, Pete's home run in Milwaukee. I mean, we can name these moments. There are a lot of bad, but there are also a lot of good. And those are the things that are going to stick with us forever from this year. And again, part of it, I think, too, is we love this group so much, or at least I do, because I know they're not all going to be back. This was their chance. This was their opportunity. So you felt a closeness of like, they're going to give this everything they've got because they know they're not running it back. They know this isn't going to look the same. JD Martinez probably knows he's not on this team next season. Jesse Winker is a free agent. Who knows if they're going to want to bring him back? They probably should. He would be a nice player on this team. But there are a lot. The bullpen, guaranteed under David Stearns, is going to look completely different next year than the bullpen that it did this year. And that's nothing against those guys. It's just the way David Stearns operates. Like, this was the year for this group of players to try to do something special. And I don't want to say that they failed in that, because they did. They did something incredibly special. They made Mets fans, whose catchphrase is, you got to believe. They made us believe harder than we've ever believed in a team. And so that's the thing that this, at least for me, this 2024 team will be the takeaway is, I think they gave Mets fans the belief again in their franchise. Because it's easy to say it, it's easy to live it, but we can all think of the moments of just utter despair that this franchise has given us. And I think 2024 is where this franchise turned around, because fans believe again.
That's what's so fun. That's what's been so fun about this season, and kind of what makes it hurt a little bit extra is 2022 was the best Mets team that I think I've ever seen. 101 wins in a regular season is incredible, but I didn't love those Mets as much as I love the 2024 Mets, because of, like you mentioned, all of those moments, the ups and downs, the David Peterson, resurgent year after what we saw from him for his first few years in the bigs, like the big Lindor moments. It's just, there are so many things that you can point to that are like, in addition to all of the grimace and OMG moments that were just genuinely so much fun. This team was so much fun to watch, and it's going to be one that fans are going to remember for a long time. And on the flip side, that's what makes a loss like, tonight's hurt a little more, is because the band is not getting back together.
Nope.
The Mets are going to look so different next year. We have no idea exactly how different, but we know that there are not going to be a ton of players that are still on this roster come 2025. So for at least the next 24, 48 hours, I want to relish, what this 2024 team meant to me and to, I'm sure, so many fans, because of, again, just how much fun it was to watch throughout the 7-8 months of the season.
And I know that there are going to be other people that are in this Mets content space, and I can think of one person in particular, and I'm not going to mention who the person is, but is going to try to trot out the same old Mets and be extremely negative about this. And I'm okay with being the podcast and being the place where we're positive even though they lost, that we're positive even though they're not going to the World Series, because I think 29 other teams are not going to win a championship this year. And there are varying degrees of disappointment that those 29 teams are going to face. And the New York Mets are certainly going to feel disappointment about what could have been. But I am not going to let the fact that they were one of the final 3 teams standing, and I'm not going to let the fact that they got 50% of the way to winning the National League pennant and going to the World Series, I am not going to let that disappointment stop me from enjoying what this was. I'm upset. I'm frustrated. I'm disappointed. I wanted this team more than anything to get to the World Series, and even more so now that the Yankees were in there. I would have loved to go up against the Yankees in a Subway Series. It would have been a lot of fun for that to be the moment where the Mets broke through and win their first title since 1986. But I am not going to then throw the baby out with the bathwater now and say this season means nothing. It means a lot, and I think it means a lot to the future. Let's end with this, because I think a lot of people want to know what's next, because we've just been kind of reacting to we picked up this podcast, and there's just been moment after moment after moment for us to react to. We haven't had a chance to kind of settle in and do kind of the cool things that we want to do here. And so what you're going to see from us, we're going to take a couple days, kind of decompress from everything. But the first thing that we are going to do here on this show is we are going to look at the past season from a performance perspective. So we will do an entire episode breaking down all of the performance from the infielders of this team. We will break down a episode of all of the outfielders on this team, and then we'll do an episode about the pitchers. So we'll go through the statistical stuff. We'll talk about the players. If they're free agents, we'll discuss the idea of them bringing them back. We will go through the performances of all of these players for 2024. Once we get through that, then it's on. There'll be rumors for us to discuss. There'll be potential player acquisitions for us to discuss, and then we will get into the meat of what is some of the most fun of being a baseball fan: the winter meetings, the rumors, the free agent stuff, potential things the Mets could do, things we want them to do, things we don't want them to do. So we are going to dive directly in to all of that. So now that unfortunately the season is over, we can kind of settle into a nice flow of getting some content to you guys on a semi-regular basis, and we will start by looking back at the 2024 Mets as a whole, regular season and postseason, and recap the year that everybody had. So that is what you can look forward to next. Make sure you are following us on Twitter. Make sure you catch the YouTube side of this, which Jack posts on his YouTube channel and then posts it out to his Twitter account. So if you follow him there, you will be notified when that gets dropped. That is going to do it for us. It is a disappointing end to the 2024 season as the New York Mets fall to the Los Angeles Dodgers. They will not be participating in a World Series, but we always believe as Mets fans, and I think this 2024 team has given us reason to believe in the future. And so it is very easy to say, to close out this edition of the show, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.